So let's go ahead and look at the ways that we can save and retrieve values from the shared preferences. If you recall, I had told you that there were two different kinds of shared preferences that we could use in our Android application. The first is the application level shared preferences, which are available to the entire application. And then the second is the activity level shared preferences, which are available to a particular activity that we're in when we store and retrieve those preferences. So first I'm going to show you how to use the application level shared preferences. And up to this point in our Android demos, we haven't actually created a custom application object. So I'm going to show you how to create a custom application class that inherits from application that we can use to insert some code even before our activities get run. What we've seen so far is that our entry point into our application has been, for this protein tracker, our main activity because we set that as our entry point. But we can also create a class that extends Android application and tell our application to use that as a custom application level class instead of the default one that's provided to us. It's actually pretty simple to do. All we have to do is go in here and create a new class, and we'll call that class Protein Tracker Application. And we're going to extend the application class that's inside Android. And then I'm going to hit Control-Shift-O to do the auto import. And you can see that now we're extending this application class that's from Android.app namespace. So then also we can override an onCreate method just like we did in our activity. And that will allow us to have a hook into the code here that will get executed when the application launches. The next thing that we need to do is tell our application to use our new Protein Tracker application. We can do that by going to the Android manifest file. And then if we hit browse for the name, we can choose our Protein Tracker application. So now you can see under application attributes, the name that we're going to use for our application is a Protein Tracker application. So now it'll be using that custom class. So now we can go in here and we can actually create the code that would get us shared settings. With an application level settings, we can use a class called Preference Manager. And then it has a method on there called get default shared preferences, and we have to pass in a context in this case, and we can call get application context in order to give it a context which it will use to get the shared preferences from. Now this preferences manager will return us a shared preferences object, so we can declare a shared preferences, and then we can use this shared preferences to modify data. Now once we have this shared preferences object, we need to be able to edit the shared preferences. So the way that we do that is we have our preferences, our shared preferences object, and on that we call edit. And this returns us back a version of the shared preferences that we can edit. It gives us an editor. And then we can use this editor to actually change shared preferences. So we can say editor, and we can say put, and then we can put different types into our shared preferences. We can do Boolean, float, integer, long, or string. I commonly use string because it's easy to know what you're dealing with, but you could use any one of these. So in this case, let's use a string, and let's make the key for this test, and then the value will be test value. Now, what we would expect here is that we're now saving under the key test the value test value. So if we were to get this data out of the shared preferences, we would expect to get, when we ask for test, we would expect to get test value. Now we can test to make sure that we're actually able to get this data from our shared preference by going into our main activity and then trying to get this value out after we've saved it. But we need to make sure that we save it. And in order to do that, we need to do editor.commit, and that will actually save the shared preference. So now I'm going to go into main activity, and when we launch the main activity, we're going to go ahead and put the shared preference value out to the console, to the log that we had done before. So let's go ahead and use our preference manager. and we're going to call get default shared preferences. And in this case, we are going to call get application context again so that we have the proper context. And that gives us a shared preferences. Okay, so now we have a reference to the shared preferences. And then from here, we can call get, and we can, just like we had a put method, we have a get method, and we can say get test. And then the second argument that we're going to specify here is a default value. So if we didn't have one stored, we could say what the default value is. In this case, we're just going to make it an empty string because we want to make sure that we actually get the string that we care about, which should be test value. So we're going to store that in an object called value. And then we are going to do log D, and we'll do protein tracker, and then we're going to put out this value. So now when we launch our application, we're going to expect to see this show up in the log. So I'm going to go ahead and run our application. And then we're going to go to the DDMS view and look at the logcat, and we can see here we should have a protein tracker. Yep, we can see protein tracker here because that's the tag we put in, and we can see that the message is test value. So we successfully stored an application level shared preference, and we did that by going to our application and getting the shared preferences, using the editor to edit it, putting into the key test value, and then we pulled it out in our main activity on our onCreate. We just grabbed a reference to the shared preferences again, and then we just use this get string to pull it out and get our value and put it out. Now let's take a look at using the activity level shared preferences. So let's get rid of this code here, and there's a slightly different method that we're going to call. It's on the activity itself. It is get shared preferences, and you can see it has a little bit of a different parameter set here, which is it takes a name and a mode. So remember how I had said that we could store different sets of shared preferences? Well, in this case for activity, we can specify what the name of our shared preferences is. In this case, let's just call this default. And then this mode, it actually allows us to specify how we want these shared preferences to be able to be accessed. So we can use a 0 for a mode private, or we can use mode world readable or mode world writable to control what the access level is of this shared preference. And basically, without going too deep into this, what this allows us to do is what it sounds like. Basically, it allows us to control the isolation level of our shared preference. If we want to make it so that only our application can read this shared preference, then we make it private. If we make it mode world, then it's if we say readable, it's readable by any other application, or if it's writable, it's also writable by another application. So for now, we're just going to go ahead and use mode private. And then this is going to get us, just like before, a copy of the shared preferences. And it's the same object that we had used in the application level shared preferences. So then we can edit this the exact same way. I'm just going to call preferences dot edit, and that's going to give us an editor. And then we're going to take that editor and we're going to call put string, and then we'll put for, let's say, activity test, we'll put a value of activity value. And then remember, we have to commit it, otherwise it won't save it. So we do editor commit, and now we've saved that shared preference. Now we still have to get that shared preference out, and I don't really want to do it right here where we've saved it. So I want to show some other place that we're going to get that. So let's go ahead and make it so that when we click this help button, then we'll try and get it out. going to go to the help screen, of course, that we had hooked up in our previous module. But before we go to the help screen, let's first log out this shared preference to make sure that we can get it. So I'm going to use this exact same code here. And that's going to get us an instance of the shared preference. And then I'm going to get the value by calling preferences.getString, and then I'm going to pass in that string activity test. And then remember, this parameter is the default, so we're going to just use an empty string, and then put this value out by doing log.d, and then we'll say protein tracker, and then we'll put out the value. So now I'll go ahead and run this application. And then we'll need to actually click the help button listener, or click the help button in order to get this to log out. So let's go ahead and do that. You can see our application's launched, and I'm going to hit this enter button, which is hooked up to the help text currently. And then we should see that we have this logged out now. So if we go to our DDMS and we look at our logcat, we should now see at the bottom here we have protein tracker activity value. So you can see that we've actually gotten the value. And just to review that real quickly, what we did here is we went into our onCreate on our activity, we got a copy of the shared preferences, and we used the key default for the type of shared preferences and the mode private. And then we got an editor, we put a string value in, and then on the on-click for that button that we had hooked up to the help, but is hooked up to the enter button now, we grabbed the shared preferences again, and then we just used the get string to get that value out, and then we put it out to the log. So that's it. It's really easy to create application level and activity level shared preferences. That's one of the reasons why I really recommend in your application to use shared preferences, because it makes it a lot easier than trying to manage this kind of stuff yourself. This framework really makes it very easy. It's just as easy as storing something in the dictionary. The only thing you really have to be concerned about is remember to do this editor.commit. If you don't do that, it's not actually going to save it. And I've gone down that road several times myself, so I just warn you to remember this piece of information here, editor.commit.